Taking English classes with qualified teachers is one of the best ways to improve your language skills quickly. If you're like me, traditional language schools don't fit into your schedule. I work irregular hours, which makes it really difficult to commit to the same class at the same time every week. To solve this problem, I have partnered with Lingoda this July. Lingoda is an incredible online language school offering English and business English classes with qualified English teachers 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. On Lingoda, you can book a class at any time that fits your schedule. I personally have taken Lingoda classes and found it to be an amazing experience. I've also recommended friends, family, and co-workers to sign up to Lingoda if they want to brush up on their language skills. Lingoda teachers are so helpful. They've helped to keep me motivated while studying and gave such incredible feedback. But most importantly, with Lingoda's expert curriculum, flexible courses, and personalized self-learning tools, you can fit learning into your life, not the other way around. They are offering up to 25% off their English classes this summer for Thinking in English listeners. Just click the link in the description. This discount applies to all 3 of Lingoda's learning paths. Lingoda Flex, where you can choose when and how many classes to take, Lingoda Teams, which offers 8 or 12-week courses, and the Lingoda Language Sprint, which is a 2-month learning challenge. Click the link in the description of this episode to get up to 25% off and start learning with Lingoda. Hello, I'm Tom Wilkinson and welcome to the Thinking in English podcast, a podcast for intermediate to advanced level English learners. Today, I want to talk about the truth behind learning styles. We'll discuss why learning style theories, including the idea that you are a visual learner or a kinesthetic learner, are not evidence or science based. We'll talk about the problems and flaws in learning style theories, and I'll end with some recommendations for all of you listening. This is quite an important episode, I think, and I hope you enjoy listening. There is a full transcript available for free on my website, link in the description, or on Spotify. Here is today's vocabulary list. To tailor. To tailor. To adapt or modify to suit a particular need or condition. As in, the teacher tailored her lessons to match the students' learning styles. Visual. Visual. Related to seeing. As in, visual learners prefer to use diagrams and charts to understand information. Kinaesthetic. Kinaesthetic. Related to physical activity and hands-on learning. As in, kinesthetic learners excel when they can engage in hands-on activity. Hands-on. Hands-on. Involving active participation and practical experience. For example, the workshop offered hands-on training to help participants understand the concepts better. Flawed. Flawed. Having imperfections or weaknesses, as in, the theory was criticized for being flawed and lacking scientific evidence. Satisfaction. Satisfaction. Fulfilment of one's wishes, expectations, or needs. For instance, the students expressed satisfaction with the new teaching methods. Multifaceted. Multifaceted. Having many aspects or sides. For example, learning is a multifaceted process that involves various techniques and methods. What is your learning style? I'm sure many of you listening have heard about learning styles before. I remember being 13 or 14 years old and my school geography teacher making us all take a questionnaire or test thing to determine our own learning style. This questionnaire used the most popular, widespread, and well-known learning style theory, often called VARK. VARK is an acronym standing for Visual, Auditory, Read, Write, and Kinaesthetic. V-A-R-K. VARK. We took the test, were assigned into a learning style based on our answers, and my geography teacher then tailored her activities based on our style. For example, she gave different activities to students who learned through hands-on learning compared to visual learning. She was tailoring, designing her lessons based on how the students best learned, according to the VARK theory. You might be thinking that this was a great thing. A teacher paying attention to learning styles, creating lessons based on how her students learn, and caring about student learning outcomes. However, there is a major problem with this approach. There is absolutely no evidence that learning styles, especially the VARK theory of learning styles, exist. Many learning style theories are categorically not based on science, not based on the reality of how people learn. Out of thousands of research papers out there, none that I could find show that people can easily be categorized into learning styles, and it is quite likely that the belief in learning styles actually harms your learning outcomes. This might be surprising to many of you, especially the teachers out there. Learning styles like VARK are in the official curriculums taught to many teachers at university and in training programs. However, if you actually look at the research, there is no evidence that they exist, no evidence that they work, and no evidence that they relate to reality. Today, we are going to take a deeper look into the truth behind learning styles. If we're going to discuss why learning style theories and learning styles themselves are a problematic concept, we should probably start with a definition of learning styles. Learning styles refer to the theory that individuals have preferred and consistent ways of receiving and processing information. Some people learn through listening to information, others learn by seeing information, or others learn by experiencing information. Learning supposedly becomes more effective when teaching methods align with these preferences. There are many different learning styles theories out there. They look at how people learn in different ways, contexts, using different equipment, or more things like that. The most commonly referred to learning style is probably VARK. VARK stands for Visual, Auditory or Oral, Read or Write, and Kinaesthetic. According to this theory, visual learners prefer using images, diagrams, charts, and graphs, and other visual aids to understand information. They find it easier to grasp concepts when they can see spatial relationships and patterns through their eyes. Auditory learners prefer listening to spoken information. They benefit from lectures, discussions, audio recordings, and verbal explanations. Read-write learners prefer interacting with text. They excel when they can read and write information using lists, notes, and textual materials. And kinesthetic learners prefer a hands-on approach. They learn best through physical activities, experiments, and real-life examples. A great article from the University of Michigan which summarize the existing research out there on learning styles. I'll link it in the transcript. It inspired a lot of this episode. But that article mentioned that all learning style theories have two core assumptions. First, the individuals, the people learning, like you and like me, have a measurable and consistent style of learning. No matter what we are learning or studying, the way we learn is seen as consistent. A visual learner will always do better with visual resources, and a read-write learner will always do better with taking notes. It doesn't matter if you are learning languages or math, the theory is consistent. Second, teaching to that style of learning will lead to better education outcomes. In other words, teachers should give visual learners charts and pictures, lecture to auditory learners, and allow kinesthetic learners to experience things hands-on. These assumptions are problematic. Let me try and explain why. The idea that people can learn in unique ways and that we can identify these learning styles is obviously appealing. It would mean that once we discover your learning style, we can make sure that you learn in the optimal way. Researchers, education theorists, and neuroscientists have published countless papers online on the way that people learn new things and the best way to teach students. And they have discovered a lot of information about the process of learning. I've actually released episodes in the past on research-backed learning approaches, things like spaced repetition. However, what they haven't discovered is the existence of solid and consistent learning styles. In fact, some researchers have described the existence of learning styles as a neuromyth, or even the same as believing in fortune telling. Basically, they don't exist. There is no research-based evidence that people learn better when they are taught in accordance with their learning style. There is no evidence that broad teaching is worse than teaching to a specific learning style. You don't need to believe me. Here are some quotes from research papers. Katzig and Arbuthnot concluded in 2006 that learning styles are commonly justified in terms of brain function, despite educational and scientific evidence suggesting that the learning style approach is not helpful. A 2017 study in Frontiers in Psychology wrote that this idea, learning styles, has been repeatedly tested and there is currently no evidence to support it. The American Psychological Association states that there is no scientific evidence to support the common myth of learning styles. They actually argue that belief in learning styles is a negative, as previous research has shown that the learning styles models can undermine education in many ways. And the British Psychological Association has commented that the entire theory is flawed, as the average person has a poor grasp on how they learn best. Teachers and students often misunderstand the concept of learning styles, and the preferred learning style of students doesn't necessarily mean it's the best one for their learning. Actually, that's an important point. How do we measure learning styles? How do teachers or researchers or educational professionals decide if you are a visual learner or a kinesthetic learner? The most common method is simply asking learners and students, usually using some questions or a quiz. I found an example VARK test online, the first one that comes up on Google when you search VARK test. Here are some of those questions. Question 1. I want to learn how to play a new board game or card game. I would A. Use the diagrams that explain the various stages, moves, and strategies in the game. B. Read the instructions. C. Listen to somebody explaining it and ask questions. Or D. Watch others play the game before joining in. The second question, I prefer a presenter or teacher who uses A. Diagrams, charts, maps, and graphs. B. Question and answer, talk, group discussion, or guest speakers. C. Demonstrations, models, or practical sessions. D. Handouts, books, or readings. All of the questions asked in the test follow this style. They're very similar questions. After 10 questions, it would tell you what style of learner you are: visual, auditory, read, write, or kinesthetic. Can you see the problem with this kind of test? They are asking your opinion on how you study best. It relies on your self-report, your opinion about yourself, and your preferences to determine what type of learner you are. It's not based on how you actually learn, and it doesn't test how you learn, but instead simply asks how you think you learn. That great article from the University of Michigan went into more detail about this. Again, I've linked it in the transcript. In general, we're not very good at judging ourselves, and we are definitely not very good at understanding how we learn. That was mentioned by the British Psychological Association earlier in this episode. These kinds of learning style tests are measuring your preference, how you like to study, rather than how you actually learn. In real life, the way you like to study may not actually be the best or most efficient approach. Many of you think you learn best through reading or through listening or through doing things. But what proof do you have? Have you ever conducted a scientifically backed test? Probably not. Or are you just reporting what you think you are best at? The other issue with the way these learning styles are measured is that they tend to focus on satisfaction rather than results. Learning styles are basically the type of learning you think you enjoy the most. They have nothing to do with how you actually learn or with which style of learning actually achieves the best results. Despite this lack of evidence of learning styles, I often hear students describing themselves as visual learners, or that they learn best from experiences. There is nothing wrong with having a way you enjoy studying. In fact, you should have a way you enjoy studying. But you should be aware that there are risks involved with labeling yourself. Many people believe in learning styles because they experience moments when they seem to learn better through one mode of instruction over another. This can be attributed to confirmation bias, the tendency to notice and remember information that confirms pre-existing beliefs. For example, you might believe that you are a visual learner because you recall using diagrams effectively, ignoring the many other instances where you learned through listening or through hands-on experience. Labeling yourself with a specific learning style can lead to self-limitation and reduced flexibility. When you are categorized as visual, auditory, kinesthetic, you might become fixated on using only that method, avoiding other potentially effective strategies. This can hinder your overall development. In fact, focusing on learning styles can mean that you don't use enough evidence-based instructional or learning strategies that are proven by science to be effective. Going back to the beginning of this episode, my geography teacher, who made us take a VARC test, spent a lot of time making 4 different activities for each group of student every single week. The problem is that she would probably have been much more effective if she had employed universal and evidence-based teaching methods that benefit all students, such as retrieval practice, spaced repetition, and active learning. An important point to note is that learning is relative and multifaceted. The issue with learning styles is that they suggest people learn most efficiently in one specific way, when this is obviously not the case. I want you to learn the location of every country in Africa, right, where it is on a map. How are you going to achieve this? By listening to me read out the description of all the locations? By reading an essay describing African countries? Or by looking at a map? In this situation, visual information is probably the best for your learning. Even if you think you're an auditory, listening learner, visual learning will help you more. Or how about learning to ride a bike? You could, of course, read a book about riding bicycles or watch a YouTube video on riding a bike, but you will learn much quicker once you are sat on the bike and practicing with hands-on experience. The best approach to learning often depends on what you are learning. So with English, this might be speaking practice needs to be done actively, whereas listening practice, yes, that can be done through listening to lectures. Grammar, you might learn better visually. In fact, this can also change regularly. It is possible that you used to be great at studying English using a textbook, but now using podcasts is better for you, and in the future, visual resources could be better. In other words, learning styles are not stable. The way you learn changes depending on the subject or the thing you are learning and when you are learning. Moreover, research has shown that using a range of different styles of learning is the most efficient way to learn. Listening, reading, looking at visuals, and trying with hands-on experience should all be combined to learn well. In order to learn, our brains need to be engaged. By using different approaches, maybe a video, a textbook, a conversation exercise, you are keeping your brain engaged and learning more effectively. So, I've spent the last 10 or 15 minutes talking about learning styles, how they're not research-backed, and how they can actually harm your learning goals. What does this mean for people like you? First, use different approaches and methods to study. Instead of trying to determine and match your learning style, engage with English learning materials in various forms. At the beginning of July, maybe just after this episode is released, I think, I am taking a Japanese proficiency test. Each week, I use a variety of different study methods. Once a week, I take a Japanese class with a teacher. A few times a week, I use textbooks to study. I watch videos on YouTube from Japanese teachers, and I use a smartphone application. When I'm tired of one study method, I will switch and re-engage my brain. Second, however you study, make sure you are taking an active role in the process of learning. Use English and use your skills as often as possible. One of the problems with learning styles, especially the listening and the reading style, is that they encourage passive learning. If you believe you learn best through listening, you may just sit and listen to lectures, lessons, or podcasts. Instead, you should be actively listening, making notes, summarizing the content of lessons, asking follow-up questions or answering follow-up questions, using the language you have learned. Third, combine what you enjoy doing with the methods that are most effective for you. How do you find the most effective methods? You could ask for feedback from a teacher. You could experiment with different approaches and see which one helps you remember things. Or you could follow some scientifically backed methods. And finally, think critically about your learning. Focus on strategies that are proven to be effective, such as spaced repetition, active recall, and contextual learning. Question the validity of any learning style theory you encounter, or any hack to learning English or learning anything, and focus on methods that are evidence-based. Set specific, measurable, and achievable learning goals. Focus your learning activities to meet these goals rather than trying to conform to a particular learning style. For instance, if your goal is to improve speaking skills, prioritize speaking practice regardless of whether you consider yourself an auditory or visual learner. So here is today's final thought. In conclusion, the concept of learning styles, particularly the VARK theory, is widely taught but lacks scientific evidence. Studies have shown that people do not learn better when taught according to their perceived learning styles. Instead of relying on these unsupported theories, it's more effective to use a variety of learning methods and evidence-based strategies. Combining different approaches, actively engaging in the learning process, and setting specific goals are the key to improving learning outcomes. By focusing on proven techniques, you can achieve better results and adapt to different learning situations more effectively. But what do you think? Do you believe in learning style theories still after I've recorded this episode? How do you enjoy studying? What different approaches do you like to use? Let me know by leaving a comment. Comment on Spotify, comment on the Thinking in English blog over on my transcript I make for every episode, or reach out to me on social media, Patreon or Discord. Patreon and Discord are the best places to get in contact with me. Thank you all so much for listening, and I'll see you next time. Goodbye.